Welcome to Shut Up and Sit. I'm Yetta Stansel, a consciousness coach and consultant. I'm on a mission to bring mindfulness to the modern world. Each week, we will offer ancient healing practices, real-world examples, and the latest research in neurobiology and behavior change into fun conversation that invites you to wake up your highest self. Now, let's go shut up and sit. All right, welcome back to the show, everybody. As usual, Yetta here, and as always, I'm so excited to be with you. I'm really excited to have an amazing, beautiful, wonderful guest here with me. Next to me is the beautiful Rachel. Rachel, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good. I'm excited for our conversation.
I think excited is my word. Everyone's like, can you really be that excited all the time? Yes. Do I have bad days? Yes. But when I put these headphones on and I come in and I sit at the bar and we start day drinking some silence and we get into this mojo and this mood, everything this is like therapy to me, honestly. It's the best therapy to just come in here and my own narrative, shut up, sit down, and either talk with the audience or talk with people who are going to teach the audience things that, it changes people's lives. No pressure, but what you're going to talk about today is going to change people's lives. And I got news for you. They're listening all over the world. I got a message yesterday from a lady in Australia who's like, I love the show. This is so great. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, that's so cool. Part of me is always like, isn't this great? We can help people. And then you guys, when the reality hits and I found out that people are listening, I kind of go, oh God, they're listening. I hope there's value here. There's a little bit of realness still inside of me. So no pressure. Today, I don't own the results of this. It's all on Rachel. But it is cool to come in and just, use technology and talk about some really cool topics. Mm-hmm. We just wrapped up my last episode was with Philip, and Philip is on the board for the Inner Work Center that you're going to talk about today, and one of my mindfulness teachers. And so as we're moving into chapter 6 in the book, which you all know, the How to Train Your Mind, Philip was talking a lot about cultivating enoughness and how mindfulness really allows you to teach yourself and to learn to believe that you are enough. And so this episode, we're kind of building on that foundation. If you all haven't listened to that, definitely go back, check that one out. But today we're kind of moving into the next part in chapter 6, which is all about why mindfulness. And for me, that was a question I thought, why do I want to shut up and sit down and go within and get quiet? I spent my life being forced to do that and being punished as a minority, as a woman, and in my own home with a lot of trauma and drama. Silence was used to punish me. And then as an adult, I found out when I met Philip and then when I came to the Inner Work Center that I've got to use silence to heal me. And it took me a moment. So the why mindfulness was a question about 8 years ago. I'm like, why do I want to shut up and sit down? I've been trying to get away from that my entire adult life. So we're going to talk about that today. Why mindfulness? And with that question, so what's your story about? Where did you find mindfulness, or where did it find you?
Yeah, so I actually found it through the Harvard Business Review and the Stanford Social Innovation.
Now that's a first. That's the first person that's ever told me that. So wow, we've got some stories to dig into. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So I was working at VCU in the Division of Community Engagements. That's the university's outreach to the larger community. And my program was called Nonprofit Learning Point. It was nonprofit, professional, and leadership development. So folks in the nonprofit sector would come take classes on all aspects of running a nonprofit. And part of my job as the director of that program was to really keep my finger on the pulse of what are, I don't ever use the term best practices, but what are leading practices for nonprofits and businesses, because nonprofits are businesses, right? Our clients, our participants deserve us to run like businesses. So we have the biggest impact. And, I read those magazines to really stay on the pulse of what's happening in the field. And I kept reading these articles and seeing how these big companies like Google and Aetna were using mindfulness as a way to build their workers' capacity and see results to the bottom line. Well, I felt like we could make that connection to the nonprofit sector that has a double bottom line.
Oh, yeah.
That if we create a culture of mindfulness where we better understand our mission and we're effective and efficient, we will better meet our mission. So I asked one of my faculty at Nonprofit Learning Point what they knew about mindfulness, and they directed me to Philip and Kay Davidson.
It's so funny how it's all connected. And how many years ago was this?
This was 7 years ago.
Okay.
And so I went to go check them out. And it was at Chrysalis at the time. It was a tiny basement space.
I remember it. I remember going there.
Very nondescript. You know, you walk down some stairs. There was nothing on the walls, the floors, the drop ceiling, nothing to identify it at all. But I sat down in that group of maybe 30 people, and for the first time ever was encouraged to be in my body and not just in my brain.
Yeah.
So when you work at a university and when you grow up in a family of academics like mine, you are taught, you learn that your
just
value.
Ahead. This is you're ahead. Well, and then the rest of it doesn't even get.
Your value is your brain, and the body is the tool that totes your brain around. And so being encouraged and guided to come into my body, to feel my body, to have awareness of my body was a complete paradigm shift for me. And I felt it. I felt the power of that practice in me the very first time. And so on my way out, I gathered a little bit of information from the people I could about what is this Chrysalis place and what are they doing? So I get back to my desk, I make notes, pull Philip and Kay Davidson in as faculty for Nonprofit Learning Point to teach mindfulness to nonprofit professionals. But I go to the Chrysalis website and I see that they're bringing this physicist, Dr. Jim Gates, in from Maryland. And he studies string theory. And his premise was that science doesn't know everything. And that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It doesn't mean it's,
just because it's unknown doesn't mean that it's not here.
Yes. So that was also a shift for me to go from this knowing to being okay with just not knowing.
Yeah.
It was huge. So, I call my wife, I'm like, this organization, you wouldn't believe it. It's all the stuff we love to talk about, makes the screws pop out of our brain. And we've got to become members and go to this keynote. So the very next day.
She was like, okay.
She was like, sure. Yeah, let's go to this keynote. And the very next day, I see through my email that Chrysalis is hiring for their first ever executive director.
And what were you doing? Were you like, oh my gosh, this is me, this is meant for me? Or were you just kind of curious? Like where did that hit you?
I was ready. I was ready to move on. I had been at Nonprofit Learning Point for a really long time. There were a lot of internal changes happening. There was a lot of shifts going on. So my eyes were already open. But when I ran this idea past Aaron to be a member of Chrysalis, it was very different than leaving all of my state benefits to go to this, startup essentially.
Oh, it was a startup. And it's so funny because I think about where it is today and you're telling me where it was then. And it's like two different realities.
Yeah. It was this beautiful, all volunteer run, landing place for the kind people. I feel like I remember saying to somebody, it's like where the kind people gather. And people who, are really living intentionally with their heart wide open, just full of wisdom and compassion. And it was very alluring.
Yeah.
So, it was, we had a kid and expenses and, it was a big leap, but I did feel that, after essentially studying nonprofit management and leadership as the director of this program for 8 years, that I had something to give to this organization.
Yeah.
And I knew because of that session with Philip and Kay that I had something to learn from this organization. And that just felt like it felt too good to pass up. It felt really special and something I wanted to be a part of.
And so the Chrysalis Center, which is what it was then, is now the Innerwork Center today. Yeah. So there's been an evolution and a metamorphosis literally and figuratively in the 7 years that you've been at the organization.
Yeah.
And so mindfulness, I'm curious before we jump forward, you were talking about it was the first time I found myself in my body. And from somebody who also spent my entire life knowing that every value I had was my brain and what I know, when I started learning about the mind-body world and integrative medicine and integrative development and health and all that, it kind of blew my mind, literally, that we aren't just what we know. And so this kind of, I use the Trinity, and you know this in my book because you read some of that mind, body, spirit language, that there are 3 components to who we are, I believe. And so I'm curious, though, for our listeners, this might be the first time they've been introduced to that. What did they do when you said was the first time I was in my body? And so a mindfulness practice there's thousands of ways, but what was it, a body scan? Like, what was the experience you had that put you in your body from a mindfulness perspective?
Yeah, it was a body scan. Yeah,
I kind of thought it was, but was curious. And what's a body scan? So for folks listening or for you all watching, you may not know, there are literally thousands of ways to practice mindfulness. And so a body scan is what?
Yeah, so in this case, we got settled and, felt our bottom on the seat and started to bring it was an awareness practice. So we just started to bring our awareness through our body without judgment. And it was a way of cultivating that presence, that present moment. And, and in that moment, we were reminded over and over again as we moved through our body, I think we probably started at the feet all the way up to the head, that there was no judgment of what you were feeling. You were just noticing. And that's really beautiful too, because I don't know if anyone has ever asked you, what did you notice? Yeah. But that's not a question that I was really asked growing up.
Oh, and the people who feel, I had to tell you 8 years ago, almost 10, this is the population that I used to be triggered by. Well, I don't know, let me check in about how I feel about that yet. And I'm just how I feel, and I'd be like, oh God, how you feel doesn't matter. It's all about what you think. Yeah. And the feeling people would I would run from them.
Yeah.
So when you notice things about your body feeling, that was new for me, that I could even trust. And I didn't realize that my life's story and experiences had turned off all feeling as a way of surviving. So if I could stay in here, in my head and in my mind, but I didn't realize my ego and my mind were wrecking things. And when I dropped into the body and started realizing, oh, there's so much more to me, and feeling you just have to open your heart yet, I'd be like, oh, I don't even know what that means. But institutes like yours exist to teach, because the majority of the world, I found, is walking around disconnected from the vehicle that's carrying their mind and their being out into the world.
Yeah.
And so there's a component to that, and then all of a sudden when I started to feel, I felt like the Grinch remember the movie where his heart starts beating and he's like, I'm feeling, and his heart starts to grow 3 times, right, as big. I never knew how powerful it was to really fully embody all of me.
It's a gift. It's such a gift. I also had disdain for feeling, but it turns out that feeling is my superpower. I am nothing but feeling.
As all human beings are. We have the ability to feel for a reason.
Yes. And so to be taught that my only value was in turning that off, I was living inauthentically.
Because if you turn off how you feel about you, guess what else you turn off for our listeners? You turn off your ability to feel for others. And Brene Brown talks about that. Like, you don't get to numb just the bad stuff you numb and turn it all off.
Yeah.
And then when you do turn it back on, a lot of stuff comes up.
Well, and that's how I would define waking up to your life, which is why I practice mindfulness.
Yeah.
Because I get this one life, and how amazing. And I want to wake up to that life, or be awake in that life.
So as you were waking up, and then this opportunity comes, and you're learning all kinds of cool things through Chrysalis, and then they start announcing there's an executive director role, which obviously you got, because she's been the executive director now for almost 8 years, going on 8, maybe
7 years.
7. And so this is a really exciting space. So what happened when now all of a sudden you're not just practicing mindfulness for your own well-being, you've stepped into creating a community resource and a culture. So it's physically located here in Richmond, Virginia, and in a little bit we'll talk about it. It is a virtual ability platform now because of COVID. But what was that like for you to step in and go, now you're building a business to then offer these resources to the community? So what happened next?
Well, this really is my sweet spot. I love building. I love the startup phase of the nonprofit growth cycle. It's all potential at this point. What I don't love is perpetuating sort of a mature model. Mm-hmm. But this was all creative thinking and collaborations and, relationship making. And I believed in what we were doing. I believed in it in my bones.
Yeah.
Because just from my first few days, it made such a huge difference in my life. My first year, it was transformative. And I know that is hyperbole and I can be dramatic, but it really was such a tremendous difference in the way that I looked at life, the way that I treated myself, the way that I treated others. I was triggered less often, and I found forgiveness, which was a huge thing for me.
Yeah, and I just want to tell you, hyperbole and drama are welcome here. High five, sister, because can we send this episode to my ex-husband? Because I'd be like, see, there is a place for that. No, and you speak about forgiveness and the permission to be really who you are. Let's go back to that for a second.
Yeah.
That is such a gift, and we don't get that in the world. That's not a social norm. We say that, oh yeah, everybody is welcome and free. We're really not. I mean, to really come home to who you really are, your idiosyncrasies, your characteristics, your creativity, your drama, whatever you bring to the table. Mindfulness doesn't say you've got to stop being who you are. It says you get to fully love and embrace who you are. And when you do that, you can show up and give permission to other people to be who they are. And the forgiveness piece.
Yeah.
To say, I am doing and was at the time doing the best I could with the level of awareness that I was at. Most of us go around walking around. I know for me, before I came to the Inner Work Center and met Philip and Kay, I didn't realize that I was living in a complete and total trance and in an illusion. I mean, I remember looking at Philip and going, so you're saying what I do and what I know and my ego is not who I am? Whoa. I always thought they were my identity. And mindfulness said, let me just take you a little bit deeper, Yetta. And the freedom that I found there to give myself permission to go, so I did all that stuff from a different place of awareness where I wasn't even really awake. I wasn't really who I really am. And I've got news for you guys watching and listening. Other people aren't either when they're in that place. And hurting people do hurt people. But when we do these things, forgiveness goes to a much deeper level. And mindfulness does so much more than just like zen us out on a cushion.
Oh, yeah. No, I don't experience like Zen too often. Oftentimes I look into my inner world and I'm like, ugh, this is a lot in there. and that's why we changed our name to Inner Work Center.
I love it.
It actually is a lot of work. There is, yes, we cultivate a spa-like, interior and we try to offer, tools and visuals and sounds to help you access certain states that are less chaotic than the outside world. But going inside, it's not always pretty and it's not relaxing. No. We have a lot to deconstruct to get to, a more present, a more intentional, a more loving, a more kind, a more healed, a more self-compassionate place.
Yeah, and that's what I loved about coming to the Inner Work Center. And I know, and as our listeners have been kind of going through some episodes, they've heard parts of my story, and of course it's in the book. But when I came in, I would come every Sunday to Philip and Kay's teachings. Transformational, her psychology background and behavioral space, Philip's corporate world, mindfulness, amazing, coming to the other resources. But what I really loved about the Inner Work Center, which was the Chrysalis back then, but was you expanded out, and my first, I guess I would say, career is in behavior change. So I'm all about nerding out on the science, the psychology, the brain, and the patterns, and assessing and watching and rebuilding, and really in health and fitness, spent my whole life being an expert in, here's where you are, here's where you need to be, I'm going to develop a program to get you there. But what I loved about this institution was I could still have that place of curiosity and science. You bring PhDs, you bring, like you were talking about, somebody on string theory in. So this wasn't let go of all your belongings, wear burlap, shave your head, and just live in the non-living world. It was, you get to come in, and I mean, some of the greatest teachers on my journey, and you guys in the content and in the book, they're all in there. You know, your speakers, James Hollis was one that I'll never forget, that I was like, whoa, Ruth King. I mean, the list goes on and on. So talk a little bit about some of the key differentiators. And I'm going to use a big business word here, you guys, but you know, what are the key differentiators when you guys went into the Inner Work Center, what you realized as an executive director, what you were bringing different that isn't about, I like that you said no best practice and it's not always best and better, but what were you bringing in addition to so that the whole community could begin to see something different about this inner work?
Yeah, I actually don't believe in that sort of spectrum model, or we're trying to do better, or there's some place that once we get there, we're healed. I believe in more of a blob.
Yeah.
And we're at every point in time somewhere on the blob.
Yeah.
And maybe that is somewhere with, I think you said a burlap sack or a shaved head, or, you know, maybe
I've done it, but it's not my look.
You know, maybe that is where you are at the time, or maybe it is, you know, in denial and pushing through, and maybe that is where you are at the time. And then you're somewhere else, right? We all have the right to be wiser, make different decisions tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so we try to meet people wherever they are in their life with a practice that they can take home and implement immediately through their own lens and their own voice. And that's really important. We were talking earlier about a lot of the misconceptions about mindfulness, and a visual that's used all the time is this person who's sitting, you know, crisscross and has their hand in a mudra, and you know, oftentimes they're you know, very thin or fit or white or women, or you know, there's the image just narrows and narrows and narrows and narrows, and that actually is a disservice to what mindfulness has to offer. You know, I do my mindfulness, you know, sitting in a chair, usually, you know, at my desk, 10 minutes a day. I have my hands on my lap. I sometimes am in silence and sometimes guided.
Yeah.
I supplement my 10 minutes a day with classes, you know, from the Inner Work with Philip's drop-in group. I do, you know, as many classes as I can to bolster my practice. But it does not look like that sort of
No, it
image.
doesn't. And the people that come in and teach, and the listeners have heard me say this, and you guys know on multiple episodes, it was the first place I could go, normal people. There was not so the culture that you've built is also one that's very mindful. And you and I have talked about this before. The work has to be in the work. If you're really going to go out and build, you know, for me, I'm very cognizant. If I'm going to go out and teach people about this, you know, shutting up and sitting and going within and take mindfulness into the mainstream in my coaching and my work, the work has to be in the work. And so it isn't about, I'm just going to do this and then turn around and behave a different way. Who you are shows up. And so who you are as an executive director shows up in the center, in the people, in the places. And I love that you brought some of that academia that says left brain and right brain are both welcome here. Instead of let's go all left or let's go all right, which is a tendency for the brain to do because it doesn't know how to do both and very well until it gets taught it. It's either this or that. Yeah,
our work is substantive, and that is a promise that we make. You know, it's grounded in either empirical research or it's grounded in a wisdom tradition, but it's edgy, but it's still substantive, it's still grounded. There's still, you know, a science behind it. And yes, there's still an unknowing behind it as well.
Yeah, and there's an acceptance. There's an acceptance, and you said this a minute ago, but this is, you guys, for mindfulness. Mindfulness says everybody's welcome. Have a seat. And mindfulness, when you cultivate it, says I can hold multiple belief systems at the same time. Mine can matter, yours can matter. And it's not I'm trying to tell you what you believe is wrong and what I believe is right. It's that ability to go, I don't know. And can I be with not knowing, but can I be with multiple perspectives too, and just be with it and not try to do something with it all the time?
I think that's true, but I don't think that often translates.
I agree with you.
I don't think it's a public perception. I think that it is facet of mindfulness.
Yes.
But it's a misperception.
And it's not coming, well, I should say it is coming mainstream, because I know if I'm talking about it, you're talking about it, and I'm hearing pockets of people around the world talk about it, it's starting to bubble up. And this whole, last year, 2020, what we've been through, politically, racially, public health, all of our belief systems have been questioned and many broken and have cracks. And so when something completely breaks, this post-traumatic growth says, oh, now we've got all these pieces to look at doing something to rebuild. And I really believe if we can pull mindfulness into the rebuilding phase that we're entering into in our society, we could create some amazing social norms that could really allow people to be who they are.
I absolutely agree.
To offer acceptance and enoughness.
Yeah, I actually think of it as, they talk about oftentimes the two wings of mindfulness is wisdom and compassion. And wisdom, is this idea of seeing clearly, but it's also knowing the interconnectedness of all of life. Compassion is seeing the suffering in others and yourself and wanting to alleviate that suffering. And so if we rebuild, if we can craft policy from that place of compassion, of seeing the enoughness of not just ourselves, but of everybody else, I think we could make something radically different. Yeah. And beautiful.
And what I love about what you're doing with the Inner Work Center, and we all have our parts and pieces we're offering, and I love this, and you all teach this. It's some of the language I picked up from you all was, wait a minute, we all have wisdom? Yeah. And you mean I can look at it the way I look at it, and like you said, take this tool and go home and use it the way that I could use it, and it might be a different way for you, but it's still the same core components. Then what happens is we're all out there kind of imparting our wisdom in the workplace and in, the communities we live, the lives we have. And if we can start to do that, that's the coolest part. So then you're in a nonprofit, and for you all, so you're in a nonprofit, you're running a business, you're talking about mindfulness. Running a nonprofit is difficult in and of itself. And like you said, there's two bottom lines, right? There's and the difference I've always said between profit and nonprofit is what you do with the money at the end of the year. Doesn't mean you run it differently. It's not still a business is my point. So, there's the financial aspect, but then you have a second bottom line. And what's that?
That's the mission.
Yeah.
So that's, making a difference in people's lives. So, our mission is to be a catalyst for well-being through our programs that inspire curiosity, cultivate mindfulness, awaken the spirit. And so I am beholden to that. And the other thing I love about nonprofits, which is very different from business, is that I'm not responsible for the success or the failure of the nonprofit. I have a board, amazing board.
So it's not all on you, is your point. It's
Definitely
not just me, the leader has to be,
No, I have an amazing board, amazing staff. I have like 42 committee members.
Yeah.
It's a large ship.
Yeah. So there's a lot of collaboration there. So mindfulness in the nonprofit world. So I'm just kind of teeing that up for those of you listening, if you don't know much about nonprofit and in the business world. So this is, really, it's important for the work to be in the work of what you're building. In order to build a nonprofit, you're doing it mindfully. You're bringing people in. And like you said, then there's the mission. And so what's that like for you to manage? Even though you said you share that with a lot of people, if you didn't have mindfulness to come in and build a business like this, how would you do it?
Yeah, I think, the way that we build a collective strategy, essentially, and then we create the plan and we work the plan, and our strategy, our finances roll up to our strategy, and our, fund development policies roll up to our strategy. It's all this one beautiful packet, which is very similar to the business world.
Yeah.
In terms of how we apply mindfulness to it, it's, mindfulness, so let's see, let me think about that for a second, because we would we would anchor ourselves to the present moment without judgment, bringing wisdom and compassion. We also have the values of substance and community, and that's the lens through which we need to see all of our strategies and all of our work. And so that's like a screen, right? And we take ideas and we throw them up against the screen, and some are going to stick and some are not, and that's okay. It's actually really, really helpful to know. It's just as helpful to know what to say no to as what we say yes to, because actually there is no limit to the intersections of mindfulness and any other topic. Mindfulness and creativity, mindfulness and food, mindfulness and family or parenting, mindfulness and work. There is really no limit to where you can intersect this philosophy.
Yeah. And I love the way that you answered that, because working with a lot of corporate clients and a lot of executives in the community here, I do get that question. So why mindfulness? Why would I want to do mindfulness? And why does that matter in the workplace? And that's a perfect example, because what if you didn't have that lens in which to, like you said, that screen, that ability to say, these are really important ways that we're going to operate and show up together, which connects our common humanity instead of says our ego's in charge and we're going to operate from a place of ego. And ego is really alive right now in the corporate world and all over the world. And what I love about this work, and I learned this some through the Inner Work Center and some through some of the teachers that you brought through the center, was I remember going, so wait a minute, I don't have to kill my ego and cut it out and get rid of it and throw her in the back alley. She's allowed to be here. Oh, what would that look like if mindfulness was brought to the lens of my entire life?
Yeah.
So I mindfully buy my teaks. Do you guys see my cute little ballet slippers? I mindfully put on things, but it doesn't own me anymore. I'm aware of what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and the outcome that I am looking for. So that's where I think when we bring mindfulness into the mainstream, it doesn't mean everything has to go away, but it started with me on a journey of going, well, why am I doing what I'm doing?
It's questioning your intentions.
Yeah. What is the reason that I'm here? And why would I want to say that to that person? Or, when I wear these shoes, is it because I want 10 compliments today, or is it because they're cute and when I put them on, I feel pretty? It's simply the awareness lens, just kind of expanding, which, our last guest, which we mentioned, Philip, was here and we talked about this. And I shared this with him, and I'll share it with you. So, one of my coaches, who is a mindfulness practitioner, and I love dearly, who's been a really great a really great guide for me. She said this last week. She said, John Kabat-Zinn's definition of mindfulness is showing up and paying attention on purpose without judgment. That got me really excited several years ago. I was like, whoa, what would life look like if I could do that? Well, last week, because she works a lot with kids, and she said, I've actually modified the definition to showing up, paying attention on purpose with kindness. And I thought words have power. And I thought, what a cool way to say, what if I could live my life, and if we could lead at home and in our public sector, in politics, in healthcare, in corporate, where I showed up and paid attention on purpose with kindness for myself first, which then naturally comes from a place of overflow that no matter where you are, if you're watching and listening, you can lead from that overflow. And I love hearing that you all are doing that in the business that you're running. And if you weren't, it would be evident to those of us that show up and learn from you all. And I think that's what you said earlier when you said where the kind people show up. It made me think about, don't forget to mention that definition, that's where the kind people show up. And that's what I experienced too at the Inner Work Center. Nobody said you don't belong here, you got to get out of here.
Right.
Because if they did, then the work wouldn't be in the work.
Well, there's nobody that cannot benefit from mindfulness. There is nobody in the whole world. So yes, of course you belong, and everybody belongs.
Well, and so that leads me to two things that I want to bring up. So one, I want to talk about, you were talking about the stigma, right? The kind of societal norm of what we're now putting out in the world about mindfulness, which is the Caucasian female, what you just shared. I actually was on LinkedIn probably a week ago now, and there was an article, and there was a Caucasian, actually it was a post, it was a Caucasian male, and he literally had written a post about the conscious female leader and talked about she is, and her gentleness and all of the things that he was talking about for women. And he was putting together a summit for female leaders in consciousness in the workplace. And the marketing picture was a white woman sitting in a mindfulness lotus position with a yoga mat and a backpack in nature. And this is what I want to talk about. And we get the forum here because it's our show, is mindfulness. And I was very compassionate, and I reached out to him and I said, what would be more impactful is if a woman, you either gave her credit and quoted her, or she actually spoke this, because that's actually not who I am. And when you show that picture, then there's a whole other idea that mindfulness is for privileged people and for certain genders. And truthfully, women don't always lead from a place of a yoga mat and gentleness in the corporate world. We face a lot of challenges. And so he was really loving. And I normally don't speak up like that, but my mindfulness allowed me to ask some questions and pose some, which he was unconscious of. And he said, I hadn't even thought about that. And I said, what if a woman actually wrote that and shared what she thought and invited me into this community and this experience? And I saw and could hear things that I could relate to, because your perspective is actually not my perspective. And so mindfulness is, I want to lead this in with a question when we talk about where we are as a world of inclusion, which you said mindfulness is for everyone. And it does cultivate enoughness, but it allows for everyone to be included. There's a lot that mindfulness could offer in the diversity, equity, justice, inclusion world that we're all grappling with right now. And I'm curious from your point of view, when I talk about that persona, the barriers to mindfulness, how does Inner Work Center overcome some of those and help people get involved in mindfulness who, if somebody else saw, if a Black female saw that, she would go, that's not me. So how do you as an organization offer mindfulness techniques to people who probably would not find them or see them in a lot of the platforms that are kind of marketing them these days?
Yeah, I think what you're saying is that representation matters.
Yeah.
And it does. It absolutely does. And how are we doing it? Gosh, well, we're doing it really slowly and intentionally and with a lot of self-reflection and respect and celebration. And that all takes a lot of time. And so we have historically been an organization of white women. It was founded by a white woman. It was volunteer run all those times. So there was no marketing plan. It was, the founder and her friends, and they told their friends and they told their friends. And there's no judgment on that. I actually think it's beautiful how Chrysalis grew. I was amazed at the love and effort that went into bringing this organization along, even when the founder died, and the volunteers picking up in her stead. It's been gorgeous. And also, in the moment that they decided to hire staff and become a wide-reaching, high-impact nonprofit organization, that's not going to happen with just one demographic. If we really want to be out there in our community, then we need to reflect the community that we serve. We need to embody the community we serve. We need to be with, not just for, with the community that we serve. And so we needed to start with our own inner work and looking at our own biases and assumptions. And that's not pretty, and it's not straightforward, but it is really important and it is really urgent. And so with that sense of importance and urgency, we have set several strategies for ourselves, to open up and actually be a part of the Richmond community in all the ways that means. And it really, there is no aspect of the organization that doesn't affect. It affects everything from the staff and the board and the volunteers. It affects our process for idea becoming a program. It affects our fund development, strategies and practices. It affects our finances, how our financial model works. So having that lens on every single aspect of our organization is really important. And also knowing that we can't do that without experts in that field. So we actually have a consultant that we work with who helps us uncover our own blind spots and our own biases and our own assumptions. And it is, now ingrained in everything that we do.
I love hearing that. And that's really where I think the future of business is headed. And we're saying business, but all of life, whether you're in the public, private sector, whatever, political, what if you make widgets, whatever it is going into that space of, one thing that I heard you say there, and you were just talking about, mindfulness is for everybody. Mindfulness is also for all business structures. You can be mindful about your finances, it weaves into every aspect of business. But when you sit down, actually, I'm going to stop myself because I'm catching myself. My coach was like, no more buts. It's always and. So catching myself there, being mindful. And in companies, unconscious bias is huge right now. I believe the only way we can tap that is to go within and do the inner work to look at what's inside of me. Yep. We're doing workshops. I'm hearing people all over going, oh, we got all these great workshops about DE&I and da-da-da-da-da. And then I hear, but we don't know what to do with it because you didn't go the next step to go within and say, well, what is that? What's inside of me? You just acquired a lot of head knowledge. And then if you memorize it, you might know a few things to put some cool posters up and maybe create some initiatives. But we're not really changing behavior or belief systems until we go within and do the inner work. And that's ultimately what mindfulness is doing the inner work.
Yeah, we actually have a whole section on our website that's about the inner work of race. And it's for allies and it's for people of color. And there are separate pages for both to help you understand, and resources to understand, and then resources to embody, resources to deconstruct what you've been taught, right? Yeah. And nobody gets to escape racism.
No. And I love that you guys have that because, you know, when I get asked to come in or other people bring people in, the truth is not one person has the answer. The wisdom is in all of us, and you found the right parts and the right people and the right resources at the right time. And the other thing I was going to say is, and it's fortunate, but it's unfortunate, but due to 2020, Inner Work Center actually did flip the switch and started doing some stuff virtually, which means now I know the group with Kay and Philip that I'm in, we have people from Michigan, Florida, from all over that I know the Inner Work Center, maybe I'm wrong, but you all weren't thinking about having a digital footprint or impact outside of the community in which you lived. So where does that come into play now? There's this whole new way that you could, I mean, it's great that you're doing this here, but you might be able to do this in a broader way. So what's going on with the Inner Work Center as you look forward now as a result of all of this?
Yeah, we love being able to reach people in their living room, and it was quite a surprise. So, you know, they say that crisis breeds innovation. We had been talking about online options or maybe like asynchronous classes that you can do for quite a while, but it was always at the expense of the richness of this in-person model. And what we found is that being on a video technology, we weren't losing that intimacy. In fact, we were gaining more. When I am on a video conference with you, I can see behind you. I can see the books that you're reading. I can see the art that's important to you. I can see pictures of your dogs or your family or your cats. And it is intimacy building. It's these, I heard a definition of love recently that really resonated with me. It was that love is actually just these micro moments of warmth between living beings. And
that's beautiful.
Yes. And I feel so much love when I do these online classes and I see people in their home environments, or maybe they're sitting outside, or, you know, it gives you just this more holistic view of these people that you're doing deep work with.
Yeah. Well, the virtual platform, you're making me think, before I started doing the episode today, I had a call with an executive, large national company, and his 2-year-old was literally, he showed me, he like angled his camera, showed me his 2-year-old playing with the motorcycle on the floor. And I thought to myself, I've worked with this company for a while, and I thought there would have never been a time where that would have happened. We would have been either in person, or if we were on some virtual platform, it would have been in his conference room. And now the barriers that are kind of crumbling, that says this work of intimacy and human connection, I think is so inspirational, because now we can go a little bit deeper. I've always said behaviors impact the bottom line. Yeah. And when companies would say, can you come in and write a plan for, I would say no, because I need to first find out, do you have the behaviors and skills on the inside to actually do the plan that I'm going to offer you to create on the outside. Now, prior to mindfulness, I did all that with science, psychology, and all of the, you know, mindfulness to me is the bridge in between those two worlds that says, if you don't have the skills and capacities, we can still talk about the outer world, but we're going to cultivate dropping deeper into the unconscious with mindfulness in the inner world. So you're not just regurgitating a bunch of facts, you're coming up with new habits and ways of being that create those moments of warmth where we can go into that work together.
Well, you're just more and more you.
Yeah.
And who doesn't want to be with someone who's authentic?
Oh, it's the best feeling in the world.
And that is what's happening. That is what's happening, I think, through COVID, is that we're taking off the mask of professionalism. We're taking off the
perfectionism
of professionalism. And we're finding a lot of beauty and connection underneath, because without that drag, we're human and we're real. We're seeing each other's humanness.
Yeah.
And we're creating much more authentic connections and relationships. And what wouldn't benefit from that? I mean, families would benefit from that. Workplaces would benefit from that. Corporate, nonprofit, it doesn't matter. You benefit when you have, productive teams.
Oh, absolutely. And it's why I love, of course, I do a lot with corporations, and I love it. And it's kind of why in writing my book and sharing the book and the workbook with you was, what would be a way that I could actually create a product and a curriculum of behavior change and science and psychology and mindfulness that wouldn't trigger, I'm not taking anything away from you. And I want you all to hear this. Mindfulness isn't saying you have to stop believing what you believe in your own religion or in your own meaning making or mindset. It says, let's just put a little lens on the inside and say, what do you believe and what are those behaviors? Are they serving you and others? And if they're not, then maybe there's another way of working with loving yourself, coming into that space of accepting yourself first instead of projecting that onto others, and going into a space that says, I'm just wanting you to go in and take a look, take a peek at what's in here. And, I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for the Inner Work Center, if it wasn't for Philip, for Kay, for you, for all of your speakers, your teaching. There were years that I came in there and the suffering, I'm going to use the suffering that I was in was sometimes debilitating. But I kept showing up. And you want to know why I kept showing up? And I want you all to hear this, is because I had a safe space to come to. Mm-hmm. And if you had left me to my own devices for a little while, I did cry myself to sleep and drink wine every night for about a year. But if I didn't have a community, an outreach of people to really keep coming back to and to feel those little moments of warmth, I don't know where I would be. Mm-hmm. And I love that you have the Inner Work Center here. Obviously, it's our hometown, but now you're able to show and offer that to people who live outside of Richmond. So I'm curious, because we've got a few more minutes before we wrap up, is what offerings do people have that they can come to? I mean, because we've got people listening from all over. Where could they engage with you at the Inner Work Center? So give them an idea of like what resources are out there, and how do they do that? Yeah,
well, first I just want to connect with what you said about your suffering. And oftentimes we think that we're in that suffering alone. And what we realize when we come into community is that there are many, many people who are suffering in the same ways. And that is the beautiful thing about this community. And you're not alone in having in what you're feeling when you are doing this in community. That actually research backs you up to say that some of the indicators of success are being in community and actually having a good teacher.
Yeah.
So it's more than just being accountable to an app, right?
Yeah.
You have a good teacher who has their own practice, who's telling you not just what they've learned, but what they've experienced, what they know to be true in their bones.
Yeah.
So if you want to do this solitary work that cannot be done alone, the first place you would go is our website. That is really where we would drive everybody. It's innerworkcenter.org. So Inner Work singular center. I don't know if I can hold this up and you can see it.
Yeah.
These are our summer programs
on our show notes, but we'll also, for the online course component, put a link to the site and put all your resources and everything. So folks will have that whether they're listening or watching.
Yeah. So this is summer 2021, but we have, about 70 classes a year that we offer in all aspects of mindfulness, in creativity, in movement, and in wisdom traditions, and awakening the spirit. So all different things that you can try on, tools that you can put in your toolbox to find the right one for you. And that's the magic, right? Not everything's going to be right for you. Find the things that work for you and put them to work in your life, to see what happens. So,
it's like cafeteria style is how I say it to folks. You take what speaks to you and what you like, and maybe you take a few things to try, and you go, maybe you like it, maybe you don't. But it is very much cafeteria style, and I love that because that meets the need of where multiple people can be, right? We're not all in the same place at the same time, and we all have different learning styles.
Yep, and different inner lives and different communities and different experiences. And so, to your point, mindfulness is not trying to replace anything. Mindfulness is additive. Yeah. And it can enhance, anything that you're doing, faith-based, not faith-based, anything.
Yeah, because again, it's showing up, paying attention on purpose. And I'm going to use Gina's new with kindness. Yeah. What would the world look like if we all showed up, paid attention on purpose, and did it with kindness for ourselves and for others? Yeah. The whole world would radically shift, rebuilding from that place. So whether you're watching today and listening from a place of leadership development, you're in your own life, in your own development, personal development, professional development, you're out in the community and as an activist, an advocate, wherever you are. Why mindfulness? Because everybody could benefit from going within and doing the work to first pay attention and love themselves and accept themselves fully with kindness, and then go out into the world and give from that overflow. Everything would change. And I'm so grateful for you, for the Inner Work Center, for mindfulness, for how it's all come together for me. And I remember when I came to you and I said, so I kind of, you guys, I was like, for you on video, I'm kind of like holding my book. I'm kind of like sheepishly, wait. So I read this book. I don't know if you're going to like the title. It's Shut Up and Sit. And you were so accepting and you're like, what's wrong with the title? Because I also still had a little bit of that, belief that mindfulness had to be very serious and very. So for me and my story, and the listeners have heard this, I know that there is a population out there that, like me, said, wait a minute, you want me to use silence to go within to figure out who I am. And I spent half my life, silence was punishment and it was exclusion and it was play it safe, shut up, sit down, nobody wants to hear from you or see you. And I find a lot of minorities are connecting with that as well, because there is this space of, you just don't tell me who you really are, so just shut up and disappear and sit down. And so for me, that's where mindfulness, and you've read some of the book too, my story was, I remember going, so you just want me to shut up and sit? And I thought, that sounds awful. But the flip side of that was I kept coming to your community and to the community of the Inner Work Center, and I kept hearing silence is actually not a punishment. Silence is unconditioned consciousness, is what I've read and heard from James Hollis, one of your speakers. And I thought, what would life look like if I could really kind of transform the narrative of silence being punishment and transform it into giving me permission to go within and find everything that I need and want in life is right here inside of me. That was the game changer.
Yes, and it is hard.
Oh my God, well, yes.
Suffering is also hard, and I feel really happy for you that you have found this practice and that you're on this journey. And I feel really happy for your listeners that they are able to go along with your journey and hear what's worked for you.
I appreciate that, because I'll tell you what, you're right. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. And the moment I woke up and said, I'm creating my suffering. What if I rewind, rewrite, and rewire where I'm at? And so for you all, for the listeners, I'm one product of thousands who've come through the Inner Work Center. I'm excited to see, because I've taken my pieces, created and crafted how it comes into my life, but everybody can do that. And I'm excited to see how the Inner Work Center is going to expand and grow out into the world. So I definitely want you all listening to check it out, the Inner Work Center. That's definitely, so it's
www.innerworkcenter.org. And we're excited to make a difference in your life too.
Yeah. So what an awesome time to shut up, sit down, hang out. We're literally at the bar. I always say this, day drinking some silence. People are walking by on the streets. Robin's hanging out, chilling over here, listening to us. And this is what life is about. We show up, We shut up, we sit, we talk, we share. Your wisdom has impacted and is going to impact so many people who are listening. So, Rachel, I want to thank you for coming in today. And before we depart, I'm curious, do you have any final words of wisdom or anything that's just coming to you that you want to share with the folks that are listening and watching today?
Oh, gosh, yes. One of the phrases that's really resonating for me right now really helps with that, fighting that perfectionist tendency, and also with forgiveness, is that we are more than our mistakes.
I love that. Mm-hmm. So you guys, you are more than your mistakes. And until the next show, I'll see you. It's been great. Yetta and Rachel, thanks everybody.
May you know goodness. May you know peace. May you know contentment. May you be at